What would you do if one day, without warning, your land was no longer yours? If someone decided, without your say, that your property now belonged to them, their rules, their fines, their control? That's exactly what happened to me. And it all started with a small, plain white envelope tucked into my mailbox like a tiny bomb waiting to go off. I remember the moment I noticed it, wedged between some coupons and a grocery store flyer. There was something about the handwriting, crisp, perfectly centered, that made my stomach tighten before I even opened it. I should have trusted my gut. I tore the letter open, half expecting a reminder about taxes or maybe a local town hall meeting. But the single line of bold text stopped me cold. Violation notice: your barn does not comply with HOA aesthetics. Fine, $250. I blinked, reading it again, sure I had misunderstood. My barn? The one that had stood on this land for nearly a century? The one my great-grandfather had built with his own hands? I gritted my teeth. There had to be a mistake. Maybe the HOA sent it to the wrong address. After all, I wasn't even in a homeowners association. My farm sat on the outskirts of town, acres away from the rows of identical beige houses in the Oak Ridge development. I was still fuming when I went to bed that night, determined to ignore it. Bureaucratic mix-ups happened all the time, right? But when I checked my mailbox the next morning, there was another letter. Identical envelope. Identical crisp handwriting. This time, the fine wasn't $250. It was $2.50. That made no sense. Was this some kind of joke? A typo? A scam? My frustration turned to something colder, something that sank deep into my bones. This wasn't just some clerical error. Someone was targeting me. And I was about to find out exactly who. I stormed inside, gripping the second letter so tightly my knuckles turned white. There was no way this was a coincidence. The fine amount had changed, but the wording was identical, down to the smugly professional tone. A mistake wouldn't repeat itself. This was deliberate. I tossed the letter onto the kitchen table and took a deep breath. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe someone at the HOA had the wrong address on file, and all I needed to do was clear it up. But that didn't explain why an HOA I wasn't part of was fining me at all. Still, I went about my day as usual, tending to the farm, feeding my cows, checking the fencing. The routine was comforting, grounding. But a nagging thought stayed lodged in my mind. By the time the third letter arrived, this time with a fine of $1,500, I knew this wasn't a clerical error. This was a shakedown. And then she showed up. It was late afternoon when the knock rattled my front door. A sharp, impatient rap, the kind that told you the person on the other side didn't care if they were welcome. I opened it to find Karen Whitmore. She stood on my porch, her arms crossed over a beige clipboard that matched her beige pantsuit, her expression carved out of pure condescension. Even the way she said my name, Mr. Callahan, made it sound like an accusation. She wasted no time. Your barn is in clear violation of Oak Ridge HOA standards. You're required to repaint, reside, or remove the structure entirely. Non-compliance will result in escalating fines and legal action. I stared at her for a long moment. Then, with measured calm, I said, I'm not part of your HOA. Her lips curled in something like a smirk. That's where you're mistaken. According to our updated zoning regulations, your property is now within Oak Ridge jurisdiction. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. This farm has been in my family for generations. My property isn't even close to your neighborhood. Karen tapped her clipboard with a manicured finger. The law is the law, Mr. Callahan. You have 1 week to comply or remove all non-compliant structures and livestock. She turned on her heel and strode back to her gleaming SUV, leaving a trail of entitlement in her wake. I stood there for a long time, fists clenched, heart pounding. The next morning, I woke up to something far worse. Trash. Piles of it, dumped right in the middle of my driveway. Broken furniture, bags of rotting food, old mattresses, enough junk to fill a landfill. As I stared in disbelief, the familiar sound of an engine idling made my head snap up. Karen. Sitting in her SUV across the road, sunglasses perched on her nose, watching. And then, as if right on cue, a city inspector pulled up. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, glancing between me and the mountain of garbage. "Mr. Callahan, we received a complaint about illegal waste dumping on your property." I let out a sharp laugh, incredulous. "You think I put this here?" He looked uncertain but went about his job anyway, taking photos, noting violations. I could feel Karen's eyes on me, drinking in the chaos. Then I spotted it. Buried in one of the trash bags, a stack of Oak Ridge HOA newsletters. Her trash. My jaw tightened. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just trying to find me, she was trying to ruin me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled to my security footage. The cameras along my driveway had caught everything. There it was, 3 HOA board members hauling bags of trash from a truck, tossing them onto my land like they were dumping a body. I turned the phone to the inspector. "You want to see who's responsible?" He watched the footage, his face darkening. Then, without a word, he snapped his clipboard shut and walked straight to his car. Karen's expression barely faltered, but I caught the flicker of tension in her jaw as she revved her engine and sped off. I might have won this round, but she wasn't done. Because the next day, my fence was cut. Not just damaged, deliberately slashed open. Wooden posts splintered, barbed wire snipped clean through. And standing in the middle of the gaping hole, like some kind of sick joke, was a freshly planted metal sign. Future site of Oak Ridge HOA Community Dog Park. I stared at it, my hands trembling with fury. She wasn't just trying to find me. She wasn't just harassing me. She was claiming my land. I turned on my security feed and found exactly what I expected. 3 shadowy figures in the dead of night. Bolt cutters flashing in the dim light. Karen, standing there like a queen overseeing her conquest, clipboard clutched to her chest like a royal decree. She had crossed a line. This wasn't just about a barn. This was war. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office, staring at the footage of Karen and her cronies cutting my fence, planting that sign like they just conquered new land. My pulse pounded in my ears, my hands curled into fists. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was theft. At sunrise, I made 2 calls, one to the sheriff, one to my lawyer. The sheriff's department was useless. The deputy on the phone sighed, sounding like he'd heard this kind of HOA dispute 100 times before. "It's probably a civil matter," he said, uninterested. "We can file a report, but HOAs tend to have their own way of handling things." I nearly crushed my phone in frustration. She trespassed. She vandalized my property. And yet, somehow, I was the one stuck handling things. At least Bill Prescott, my lawyer, was pissed. "She cut your fence, planted a sign on your land, and is threatening legal action," he muttered, voice tight with disbelief. "That's some next-level lunacy. We'll file for trespassing and vandalism, but be warned, people like her never fight fair." I was already learning that the hard way. That afternoon, as I was repairing my fence, a white city van pulled into my driveway. A woman stepped out, clipboard in hand. Child Protective Services. She walked toward me, all polite professionalism, but her eyes scanned the farm like she was expecting to find something horrific. "We received a report that a minor is being subjected to illegal labor conditions on this property." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She flipped through her notes. An anonymous tip indicated that a child under 18 is being forced to work in unsafe conditions. I nearly laughed. I knew who sent the tip. There was only one teenager on my farm, Luke Reynolds, a 17-year-old kid from town who worked here part-time to save up for college. He wasn't just an employee, he was a friend, a hard worker, and, most importantly, a volunteer. He wanted to be here. Luke showed up right then, carrying a bucket of feed for the cows. His face twisted in confusion as the caseworker turned to him. She asked him a few questions: how many hours he worked, what kind of tasks he did, whether he felt pressured to stay. Luke answered honestly, but I could see the frustration growing in his expression. "Lady, I get paid better here than any job in town," he scoffed. "Mr. Callahan even lets me set my own schedule." "Who told you I was being forced?" The caseworker hesitated. She had expected something else: child exploitation, overwork, a scandal. Instead, she found a perfectly legal part-time job. Then Luke's mother arrived. She had gotten my call and was furious. "You mean to tell me someone's accusing my son of being mistreated?" she snapped, glaring at the caseworker. "Because last I checked, the only person harassing my family is that damn HOA." The woman backed off fast, apologized for the misunderstanding, and left. Karen had tried to weaponize the government against me. I thought that would be the worst of it. But 2 days later, I got an email from the county office. The subject line made my stomach drop. "Notice of property rezoning request." I skimmed the email, my chest tightening. The HOA was trying to buy my land. Through some legal loophole, they had filed a proposal with the county to reassess underutilized land for community development. They wanted to claim my property through eminent domain. My hands shook as I read the next part: a list of community members who had signed in favor of the rezoning. Names. Addresses. Fake signatures. The HOA had forged petitions, pretending the town supported their land grab. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Bill's office. By the time I got there, I was shaking with fury. Bill looked through the documents, his expression darkening. "This is bad," he admitted. "HOAs don't usually get this aggressive, but they're trying to strong-arm you out." He leaned back, exhaling sharply. "We're going to need real people to fight this." So we did exactly that. That night, Bill and I went door to door, gathering actual signatures from real residents. Farmers, store owners, people who had no idea their names had been forged. And when the county held their public meeting on the rezoning request, we showed up in force. The town erupted when the forged petitions were exposed. The county denied the HOA's request on the spot. Karen wasn't just humiliated. She was furious. And I knew she wasn't done yet. The rezoning attempt had failed, but Karen wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat gracefully. If anything, it seemed to push her into desperation mode. She was no longer satisfied with harassment, she wanted to break me. It started with the rumors. People in town began whispering about my farm, wild, ridiculous claims. That I was running an illegal dairy operation, that my cows were genetically modified freaks, that I was somehow poisoning the local food supply. It would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Then the drone showed up. It was late one evening, the sky painted in deep shades of blue and orange as I finished my last rounds on the farm. Just as I was heading toward the barn, I caught a faint hum overhead, a sound too mechanical to be a bird, too steady to be the wind. A drone. Hovering over my property, its little red light blinking as it silently recorded everything. I narrowed my eyes. I wasn't stupid, I'd already heard Karen spreading rumors that I was using a drone to spy on HOA homes. She had made a big scene at a town meeting, screeching about privacy violations and demanding that I be fined for trespassing into their airspace. Which was funny, considering I didn't own a drone. But now, watching the device circle my barn like a vulture, I knew exactly who did. I pulled out my phone, flipped through the security feeds, and tracked the drone's movements. It wasn't just flying aimlessly, it was following a specific path, deliberately recording. Someone was looking for dirt. I followed the hum of the propellers toward the edge of my field, where I spotted two figures crouched behind a patch of tall grass. One of them was fiddling with a controller, completely unaware that I was right behind them. I switched on my flashlight, flooding them in light. One of them, Todd Benson, one of Karen's lackeys, whirled around, his mouth falling open. And standing right next to him, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a battle shield, was Karen. She shrieked the moment she saw me, pointing a dramatic finger. "Turn off your drone." I crossed my arms. "Your drone, you mean?" She puffed up like a furious rooster. "You're invading our airspace. That is a violation of our privacy rights." I glanced at Todd, who looked like he desperately wanted to sink into the ground. "So let me get this straight," I said, barely holding back a laugh. "You're accusing me of using drones to spy on people, while standing next to your own drone?" Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I lifted my phone, revealing that my security cameras had caught the whole thing. Every second of their trespassing. And then, as if the night wasn't absurd enough, Karen tried to grab the drone out of the air. She leapt upward, flailing her arms, trying to swat it down like a piñata. Todd muttered a horrified, "Karen, no," but it was too late. In one final, spectacular display of incompetence, the drone's landing legs got tangled in Karen's hair. She screeched, spinning in frantic circles, yanking at the machine like it was a live animal attacking her scalp. Todd tried to help, but only made it worse. By the time she freed herself, half her hair was standing straight up, fried with static. I stared. Todd stared. Even the cows in the field seemed to stare. Without another word, Karen stormed off, dragging Todd with her. The next morning, a large envelope arrived by courier. A lawsuit. The HOA was officially suing me, claiming that my land was rightfully theirs due to recent zoning expansions. That my barn, livestock, and dairy operations were non-compliant. That I owed a staggering amount in fines, so high that I could have replaced my entire herd of cows. And, of course, they included a ridiculous claim that I was using drones to harass community members. I took the papers to Bill, who read through them in stunned silence before letting out a long, slow whistle. "This," he said, "is absolute nonsense." Then he grinned. "Let's bury them." For the next week, Bill and I dug through every single zoning record, every HOA bylaw, every county file we could find. And then, late one night, we found it. A clerical error. The document that supposedly put my land in HOA jurisdiction? It was based on an outdated map that the county had already corrected. The HOA had never actually completed the proper paperwork. Meaning? The entire lawsuit was built on a lie. The court date was set, and I was ready for war. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread fast, neighbors, farmers, and even a few curious townspeople had shown up to watch the showdown. On one side sat Karen Whitmore, stiff as a board, her perfectly manicured hands folded over a stack of paperwork. Next to her was a lawyer in an overpriced suit, flipping through his notes with the confidence of a man who thought this case was already won. On my side, Bill Prescott, grinning like a wolf who smelled blood. The judge called the session to order, and Karen's lawyer stood first. He launched into a dramatic speech about preserving the aesthetic harmony of Oak Ridge and protecting property values from agricultural blight. He painted me as a disruptive force, a stubborn man who refused to comply with community standards, someone who was a danger to the neighborhood. I glanced around. The only people nodding along were the HOA members. Everyone else looked unimpressed. Then it was Bill's turn. He strode to the front of the room, calm and composed, and set a thick folder onto the judge's bench with a satisfying thud. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "before we get into the absurdity of the HOA's claims, let's clear up one crucial fact." He flipped open the file and pulled out the county's official zoning map. The corrected one. This document proves that my client's land was never legally rezoned into HOA jurisdiction. He paused for effect. "Meaning every fine, every complaint, every lawsuit they've filed against him has been fraudulent." The judge studied the papers. His expression darkened. Karen's lawyer scrambled to respond, flipping through his own stack of documents, but Bill was already 2 steps ahead. "We also have security footage," Bill continued, sliding a USB across the table, showing Ms. Whitmore and her associates trespassing, vandalizing property, and, let's not forget, planting a fraudulent dog park sign on my client's land. The judge leaned back, exhaling sharply. He turned to Karen. "Ms. Whitmore, do you have anything to say in your defense?" And then, she cracked. She shot to her feet, knocking her chair over, her face twisted in fury. "This isn't fair," she shrieked. "He's been defying us since day one. He's ruining our neighborhood. He..." "Sit down." The judge's voice boomed through the courtroom, gavel slamming against the wood. Karen froze. The judge cleared his throat, flipping through the evidence one last time before setting the papers down with finality. "In light of the overwhelming proof provided," he said firmly, "this court dismisses all claims against Mr. Callahan. Furthermore, considering the trespassing, harassment, and property damage, I am granting a restraining order against Ms. Whitmore and any representatives of the Oak Ridge HOA, barring them from stepping foot on Mr. Callahan's land." Karen turned purple. It got worse. "I am also referring this case for review by the district attorney," the judge continued, "as there may be grounds for criminal charges." The courtroom erupted. I let out a slow breath, relief washing over me. The HOA's case had crumbled to dust, Karen had lost, and my farm, my home, was finally safe. Not long after, "For sale" sign popped up in front of Karen's house. Within weeks, she was gone. Some say she moved across the state, looking for a new neighborhood to terrorize. Others joked that she'd probably try to start her own private HOA in the middle of nowhere. Either way, the town let out a collective sigh of relief. And as for me, life went on. I went back to milking my cows, making my cheese, and living my life, without HOA letters cluttering my mailbox. The best part? People in town, ***, even a few former HOA members, ***, rallied behind me. Some started shopping at my farm store, others just stopped by to shake my hand. The battle was over, and I had won. But it made me wonder, how many others had been bullied, harassed, or fined by HOAs for no good reason? How many people had felt trapped by ridiculous rules, powerless against the Karens of the world? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.